dreary night of November. Welcome, Franken readers, to Sundays with Frankenstein. A selfish pursuit had cramped and narrowed me until your gentleness and affection warmed and opened my senses. I became the same happy creature who, a few years ago, loving and beloved by all, had no sorrow or care. Happy creatures, this is episode 4 of Sundays with Frankenstein. We'll be covering chapters 5 and 6 of the 1818 edition today. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach in Philadelphia, and joining me today is actor and collector and another happy creature, Dan Hodge. Hi, Dan.
How you doing, Ed?
I am absolutely fabulous. I am so excited to do this today. I'm so happy you're back.
Delighted to be back. Couldn't be happier.
And you're home now. You're not out on the left coast, so we're as far apart this time. So
settled, comfortably settled now.
Good. You're very lit behind you there. So
I know. I might bring the blind down to kind of cut some of that.
Although it's stained glass, is that? Look at your set. That is lovely.
I mean, you can see why I put this to my back to begin with.
Yes, that is certainly a good idea. So and you radiate though, so maybe.
Oh well, shucks.
Well, it's a good thing to do on Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone! It's also my wedding anniversary.
Oh, perfect.
So 22 years we have been together, and this is 22 years of happily ever after. I can absolutely say unironically. And we had one of our audience members share this with us, and I wanted to show you guys. These are monster Valentines, or should we call them Frankentines, as Chris in our Zoom chat here said earlier. Made by Olivia. Olivia is 11, and she watches this show with her mother, Darla, and she sent us all her gorgeous artwork, including this gorgeous picture of Boris Karloff's Frankenstein, and I love these. You Bring Me to Life, which is this one here. So You're My Type, We're Bound to Be Valentines. There's a werewolf one down here. So these are absolutely lovely. And Olivia, I am so excited that you enjoy the show. And thank you for sharing these with us. So isn't that great? We get like art in the mail, like people send us this stuff, which is really cool. I want to remind everybody who is on the chat in Zoom that we're to set your Zoom chat to all panelists and attendees, so everyone can read your chat. Dan, are you drinking anything today?
I am. I've got a rather appropriate piece of.
I love that.
And a lovely bottle of red wine. So.
Good. I am drinking this fabulous whiskey today. I know we always have a special cocktail, and that's really great to have, but that I get to just drink straight whiskey on a show is even more exciting for me because I love it. And today, from Tamworth Distilling, which you can buy at Art and the Age in Philadelphia, it is called the Deer Slayer. And it is venison flavored whiskey, hence the Deer Slayer name. Also, they get it from James Fenimore Cooper's Leatherstocking Tales. It is venison flavored whiskey, and Tamworth has sourced red deer venison from a local New Hampshire farm, then hand chopped the meat and tossed it with cranberries, porcini mushrooms, juniper berries, and green peppercorns. And I swear to nature, as Victor would do, that it is absolutely delicious. I really love this. Yeah, I could sip this all. I could sip this all day, and I will sip this all day. So I'm sure I will finish it up afterwards. Thanks to Art and the Age and Tamworth Distilling for providing this today, but we are not just drinking here today, although I am. We're also talking about Frankenstein, and what we'll do every week is dissect, anatomize, dismember, and bring back to life this book by Mary Shelley, chapter by chapter, page by page, word by word, as we create our very own conversational annotation of the entire novel. In doing this, we at the Rosenbach ask you to support us as well, which you can do by donation on our website, or if you are not already a member, please join the Rosenbach. The basic Rosenbach membership level is even called the Mary Shelley level. So I'll have a little more to say about this at the mid-break. But right now, Dan, I want to get started on this show. But the first thing I want to bring up, well, I'm going to bring up something with you. But yeah. I got an email from one of the people in the audience, from Bob. And Bob's there today. I saw in the Zoom audience. And about the Villa Diodati, which was, Byron's residence on Lake Geneva. Mary Percy visited. They had the ghost story contest, all that. Right. Bob wrote me an email and he said, I'm reading a biography of John Milton. So already big, plus. I love Bob. He's great. And discovered that Milton was a friend of Charles Diodati into their young adulthood. Milton composed an elegy for his friend upon his demise at an early age. Diodati's family were of Italian-Swiss nationality and had a home in Geneva. Bob asks, could this Villa Diodati be that home? Is it named for them? It is. It is named for them, but and it was their house. And it's interesting that Byron believed, and so did Mary and Percy after they visited him, they believed that Milton had actually stayed in that house, because Milton did visit the Diodati family over there. I think we're pretty certain that he visited them in Geneva at one point. And so where would he have stayed? He would have stayed with the family. Byron and company believed that Milton, who wrote Paradise Lost, had stayed in the Villa Diodati, and they were there too. It's not true though. And they didn't know that it wasn't true, because the house wasn't built until something like 1730 or something like that. So long after, Milton was dead, the family built the house. So Milton did know the family who owned this house and was close friends with Charles Diodati, but he did not actually stay in the house. But they all believed it. They all thought they were writing Promethean poems, and they were kind of talking about, soon after Percy was reading Paradise Lost aloud to Mary at night. That was what they did for fun. And they thought they had stayed in a place that Milton had been in. So that's the Villa Diodati Milton connection, Paradise Lost connection. There actually is one. But what I want to talk about with you, Dan, is because you missed last week.
I watched it, but I wasn't here.
Yes, we didn't have you on the show, but because and I did think early on, like, maybe I should just have everybody on for like key scenes, but we're not. We're going to save that to the end. We'll have an after show with everybody on. You weren't there for the creation scene to talk about it with us. So I just thought we'd begin by getting your take on it and how you read and what you think about the dreary night in November creation scene in the novel.
It's interesting because, I remember reading the book the first time when I was a kid, and I had seen the Karloff and all that kind of stuff. And how disappointed I was to read the creation scene in the book. Because he gathered the instruments of life around him, and then at one point the dull yellow eye of the creature opened, and it's decidedly vague, which isn't at all like in popular culture. The creation scene is like the focal point of the film. And interestingly, like you look at the what's commonly called the Thomas Edison picture, from 1915 or 18, I forget which. I think it's 18. And that one's interesting because you've got like I don't know if you've ever seen it. You can find it on YouTube.
Oh yeah.
They basically built like a dummy of the monster and burned it and then shot it in reverse. So it kind of like comes together.
Yeah.
But anybody will tell you that like, it comes down to the creation scene in the 1931 Frankenstein, with, Colin Clive screaming, it's alive, which is like, people who've never seen the film know the moment, it's completely pervaded popular culture. and the equipment, the snapping electric created by Kenneth Strickfaden, is iconic, and was again, the same equipment was used in
Young Frankenstein. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting that when you read about Frankenstein, there have been a couple of books where they talk about what the creation might be, and they almost always tie it to the electrical experiments at the time, when they were discovering that electricity could make, muscle contractions and things happen. But nowhere in the book is it tied to electricity. It's a rainy night and there is, there's lightning strike of the tree, of course.
There's enough hints in it that, talking about this, and even in the introductions, both introductions mention or no, maybe it's just our 1831 introduction mentions electrical experiments and galvanism. Sure. And so
it's hinted at,
right.
But I think it's decidedly vague. And interestingly enough, in the book, now that I read it from, down the line from other perspectives, it feels far closer to alchemy.
Mm-hmm.
The alchemical sort of pursuit of gold, and thereby, the philosopher's stone and youth and all that sort of thing. And given the amount of detail that goes into other parts of the book, I can't help but feel as though it's, to a degree, intentionally vague, as though there would be danger in imparting,
Well, Victor says that at one point. He says,
yeah,
I'm not going to tell you the secret because, it's too dangerous.
But I love it. And it is a flashpoint for what it means. It feels like when you watch something like that dreadful Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, after a while it starts to feel like anything.
Dreadful could be a compliment too.
Well, but anything that exists outside of crackling electrical equipment feels as though it's intentionally avoiding something, like trying to be too clever by half.
Yeah.
Rather than actually sitting back and looking at the book and saying, well, what else could it be?
Yeah. And the vagueness of it kind of allows it to then not seem silly, decades, centuries later, that you're reading this like that's not going to happen, so.
Well, and it's that I find myself wishing that we had iterations of it before 1931. We've got you've got like in the stage play Presumption or The Fate of Frankenstein, the creation is again vague, or I think it even left off stage, in fact, if memory serves. You don't actually see the event of it. And I wish that we had pinpoints so that you could hear what people thought it was before Ken Strickfaden codified it for us.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I wonder, because I can't off the top of my head recall if any of the stage versions of Frankenstein plays had something on stage. And you're not necessarily even going to find it in a script, because it could be done by whatever effects whoever was putting the show on at the time. And that's something I really want to look up. But the plays love to make it seem like it was much more alchemical, like that it was a magic process. And of course, tied to that whole Faustus tradition that goes on that Frankenstein is part of, but yet is moving away from by talking about real science of the time in the novel.
If you've ever seen I think it's Faust. Well, there's a wonderful creation scene or kind of conjuring scene in the silent film Faust, the Murnau Faust. And there's also a really kind of wonderful expression of it in the silent film The Golem.
Mm-hmm.
And each of those have kind of science/mysticism based moments.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they could be a really excellent counterpoint to what it is, because both of those films with the expressionism have a deep impact on what it was that James Whale was doing, particularly in the first film, and then even further in The Bride Frankenstein. So, the creation scene to me is fascinating in how vague it is. Mm-hmm. And then the events that follow with him, throwing himself in the bed and the creature coming to him and all that stuff. It's it almost never comes up in film. Film takes the book as the flashpoint and throws it into something else altogether. Or even and that began with that Presumption or The Fate of Frankenstein, that play, which is a staggering piece of theater if you spend any time with it.
We should do that. We should put that together. So,
yeah, absolutely.
I would like, and I've seen people do 19th century plays and kind of in their melodrama, because it seems kind of funny. I've seen modern productions kind of play that up, and I really want to see a piece that doesn't play it up for laughs, that like it's deadly serious. And can you convince a modern audience with this dialogue and, you know, and settings and how it's put together? Can you convince them not to think it's funny?
Well, and it's interesting because the way the theater was being made at the time, um, they didn't have the kind of unities thing that you know that we tend to cling to, where serious plays have to be serious, funny plays have to be funny. Like the
True.
two, because it was popular entertainment, the two lived side by side. And funnily enough, Presumption begins with, I mean, the way plays happened at the time, there was music in them. Every play had a song in it. You know, melodrama being what it was, and it begins, I believe, with the servant slash assistant character singing like a doggerel song.
Yeah, and he's very much a clown figure through it, like a
Yeah.
Shakespearean clown all through it.
Yeah, how his knees shake and all that kind of stuff, and his bones rattle from what's happening just off stage, and then the monster gets made. So, yeah, it's the existence of the monster in popular culture, and I mean, I could take it really far afield here because, of course, we know that the character that we now call Igor doesn't exist in the book. You know, he does it devoid. Frankenstein creates this life devoid of an assistant. But in the first stage iteration, there's an assistant, who I believe is named Fritz, and that name carries forward into.
Fritz gets carried through, yeah. Where does Igor come in? I can't remember. I do used to know this.
Igor, the name became current. The character of Igor, as we know him, was created in 1939 for Son of Frankenstein.
It is?
By Bela Lugosi.
There's no before then. There's no real Igor.
That's the. Well, I mean, you've got Fritz, who's the hunchback.
Yeah, but the name Igor doesn't exist before.
But the name Igor doesn't become attached to that until 39, and then they kind of retroactively do it, where they're like, "Oh, this is my father's assistant, Igor," and of course, finest performance of Lugosi's career. It's a masterpiece.
Igor and Son of Frankenstein. It is absolutely. I agree with that.
And from like now, all hunchbacked assistants are Igor.
The other, and we have a chat Igor, and thank you, Brianna, for being our chat Igor today in the chat, taking care of people on Zoom. So we have the creation scene, and it's muted, and we don't get details in it, but it's still affecting. But what we do get is a very specific description of what the creature looks like.
Absolutely.
And for first-time readers, especially as you were a kid, probably it had to seem shocking because it's not Karloff's Frankenstein, and it's not any other Frankenstein that you had seen at that point. What were your impressions of reading that, or what do you think of the way he is described?
I mean, again, it's that thing. As a kid, I couldn't get behind it because for me, Karloff was the template. But looking at it now, it's fascinating how the lustrous black hair and the pearly white teeth, and how the way that he puts it, each of these things is beautiful, would be beautiful unto itself, but the connection of all of them, and the yellow skin that's stretched tight, barely covering the workings of the muscles, it's a pretty horrifying description. And yet, interestingly, he talks about having created this person out of bits, but there, at least at that juncture, is very, very little talk of the scarring. And something I've always wondered about is the creature's giant stature. Like, if it's created out of people, where are you finding this many giants to piece this thing? Like he says, 8 feet in height. Where are you going to find an 8 foot tall?
I guess there's an extra femur, or like how do you elongate the frame?
That to me is the real question. So it seems to me, as much as anything else, the yellow skin, the dull eyes, and the height are the things that really mark out the creature in the book. He's immense. And cadaverous, to be sure. Yeah. But again, a sidestep. There's a television movie from '73, I think, called Frankenstein: The True Story. And the creature is played by Michael Sarrazin.
Yeah.
Handsome. I mean, good-looking fella. And the thing that they play with that I think is really fascinating is because he's dead flesh, decomposes over the course of the picture, which I think is a really fascinating way of navigating this creature becoming untenable to look at. Yeah. Because when Michael Sarrazin gets off that table, he's a good looking dude. You can't argue with it. I mean, he was one of the hunks of that period.
Yeah. and they play it in reverse, the beautiful to ugly, and that, you know, and play that up in the film. That's a good one too. That's one with James Mason too, right? Is
James playing Dr. Polidori.
Yeah.
And he's got the long bushy eyebrows, and they're waxed into like little owl curls. I remember seeing that, just being blown. The guy waxed his eyebrows, like,
I should do that.
like
I should do that. Really get them up there. Get them going. So, all righty. All right. Well, let's hit this chapter. We're in chapter 5. It's the 1818 edition. I keep getting people that some people do have 1831 editions, and they're asking me, oh, well, you know, it's different in this. I think we're about a chapter off. Like the chapters change throughout it, and you can look up online. You can look up an 1818 edition, and you can sync it up with yours and see where it is in the 18, and then look in your text to figure that out. But it's chapter 5 in the 1818 edition, and it starts with, well, Victor has previously, he's been nursed by Henry Clerval, and their burgeoning romance, it seems, in the novel. And Victor just has repeated romance after romance with other men, and then of course he's creating a man, and then that man tries to enter his bed, and that is the moment of rejection. So there's absolutely, you know, a whole gay reading of this novel that really works.
Well, and comes to full flower for the first time in 1935 in The Bride of Frankenstein, with that wonderful Ernest Thesiger performance.
Oh God, yeah.
I mean, iconic performance.
So Henry has nursed him back to health. Victor's now recovered, and he's given a letter from Elizabeth, which he reads, and it is, you know, Clerval put the following letter to my hands, to Victor Frankenstein, my dear cousin, and she notes the one thing that has been going on that Victor even knows, and he keeps mentioning how he has been ignoring. And this is not, this is the you know, for me, the two things that are really wrong with Victor are not that, or the two greatest things are not that he has, you know, pushed science too far. That the greatest things that he's done wrong is separated himself and been alone from his family and left the people that he loves and done that to himself. And then also that he doesn't take responsibility for his creation, which will really become more evident as the novel goes on. But right away, even his family noticed the uneasiness, she writes, we have all felt concerning your health, and that he's not there with them. And she also mentions that surely, Victor, you must have been exceedingly ill, and this all makes us very wretched. And that wretched just comes up over and over. It's of course a name. One of the things that the creature is called a wretch, and the creature says he's wretched. And I looked it up in the novel. 66 times in the novel, wretched appears in some form. Wretch appears in some form. Wretch, wretched, wretchedness, wretchedly. 66 times has an effect on the reader over the course of time, where you keep seeing this word wretch, wretched, and even Elizabeth is using it here. And it's a term that we don't use much anymore. I did that Google Ngram search, and the use of wretch was kind of high, like in the early 19th century, and it's just completely down, and people hardly use it at all today. But of course, I'm not going to encourage the resurrection of, you know, I usually do encourage the resurrection of terms, older words, but I want a little less wretchedness, fewer wretches in the world. So I don't want to see wretch make a comeback in the world. Because yeah, that's not good for now. We need less wretchedness, right? But she also then says in this first paragraph, we shall all be the happiest creatures in the world if Victor, you know, comes back into their life. That to just hear from him will be, you know, they shall be the happiest creatures in the world. And that's another word that creature comes up, and people use it, and the being, the creature, is called creature. So I love how language happens in this novel, and how these words have resonance. Even just a simple word like creature or a simple word like wretched winds up having resonance through the whole book. we get a little Frankenstein family, and she has to, this letter has to serve, especially when it comes to Justine, as the kind of, exposition. Like, we need to know about who, like, of course, Victor knows all these people, but he's at least getting some info here about Ernest, his brother, who in the end will become the last surviving Frankenstein, although he's ignored after this chapter. No, I think he's mentioned a little later. He comes in a little later. But we hear a little about Ernest, his brother, and it's interesting what she says about him here, because they're trying to figure out what profession Ernest should follow. And they settle on a farmer, right? Cousin, a farmer is a favorite scheme of mine. A farmer's is a very healthy, happy life, and the least hurtful, or rather the most beneficial profession of any. She says he's not at all fitted for such an occupation as like a judge, which the father wants him to be. The employments of a prosperous farmer, if they were not a more honorable, they were at least a happier species of occupation than that of a judge, whose misfortune it was always to meddle with the dark side of human nature. And clearly, when she's getting to that, there's more to this passage than just talking about whether Ernest should be a farmer. This is a point that Mary Shelley is trying to make, or it's an idea that she has in this novel that she wants to develop. That the that farmer is beneficial and honorable because it helps people, and these are the kind of occupations we should pursue in life. And of course, what has Victor been doing? He has been pursuing an occupation that he thinks is going to be beneficial, but winds up, being disastrous for everyone. And it just happened so early. Go ahead.
I interestingly had kind of a different read on that section to a point. If only because, well, I mean, I think the balance that you're hitting at is exactly right. But there's a thing that I keep seeing in this book where there is a misunderstanding of what people actually need, and a misunderstanding of what is actually beneficial for somebody, because they talk about how the brother is always kind of sickly and his health is enfeebled. So the best thing for him is difficult manual labor. And to me, I look at that and go, you're like, if someone is sick and is navigating their life under a constantly enfeebled state, making them a farmer where they get up with the sun and go till the soil and like exhaust themselves every day can't be the right fit. At least to my estimation. I might be wrong in that. That might be my read on it. But there's this thing, if chasing that, there's a thing that to me consistently happens over the course of the book where people will look at someone with a problem and completely misdiagnose how to deal with it. Yeah. So we got, for me, the Frankenstein is a book full of people who don't know what people actually need.
Yeah. And the 1831 edition is different in that she rewrites it, and it's not a farmer now. She has a whole passage where Ernest talks about how he wants to be in the foreign service, which I'm assuming is a kind of, she doesn't explain exactly, but so it seems as if a kind of government job is what he wants. He wants to work in the government, but it's also like to help people and to be in a position where I would do something beneficial to society. So she doesn't move away from that characterization of where they want to put Ernest. But they move away from being a farmer. Maybe she just thought it was a ridiculous thing to say, in her first edition. I wish we had our reasons for changing the edits that she made in the 31. But she does not. But there's also a little hint too of what's going to happen, because she talks about the dark side of human nature that judges see. And we will see the dark side of human nature in the legal system, but not in the way that you might normally think, that like they have to deal with criminals and murderers and that kind of thing. It's how they deal with an innocent person, and it's the legal system that is actually representative of the dark side of human nature. Next week we'll see that. But she's hinting at that here. So and I think Percy might have thrown in the dark side of human nature about judges.
That could very well be.
I can't 100% remember if he does that, because it is yeah, because I have it right here. No, it's pure. No, that's pure Mary. That's pure Mary. He did make another change, but it doesn't matter. That's pure Mary. But the fact that it is the legal system, I think, is what she's hinting at. And this is also he's biographical though too. That as they're writing this, they are still dealing with or have already been denied Percy the adoption or the custody of Percy's children from his first marriage. So they've gone through this. As she's writing this, they're going through this court process where Percy's trying to get his custody of his children, and the court denies him, but they deny him because of his morality. And this, obviously, they don't deny it because he abandoned his wife, kind of thing. It's or they do, but that's just part of it. It's really the bigger picture that you will be an unfit father for these children. So, I mean, I don't know if they were entirely wrong in that sense, but Mary and Percy certainly thought that they should have, been able to raise his children. So, so they're dealing with the legal system, and then she's got another hint that the legal system is a place where the dark side of human nature, comes out. And then she jumps right into Justine in a rather clumsy way for, a novel. Like, do you not remember Justine Marie? Of course you do. Like, Victor grew, like, he was in the house, he knew her, all this stuff. We find out later he really knows her. I will relate her history. This is the exposition part that we get here, that we have to explain who Justine is for the I'm looking at questions here. And if you have questions to ask, throw them in the Q&A on Zoom here, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can in this show.
We joke about things like this in the theater, where it's, bad exposition where two characters walk on stage and one of them says, "I am, as you know, your brother."
Yes. But she puts it in here that, do you not remember Justine? I will relate her history. And she gives this history of Justine, whose name, of course, is, where justice come, just, righteous. Her name means she's the righteous one. Just and righteous. So that'll come into play a little later. But she is she gets another childhood story like they've all had, like Victor's already described for Elizabeth. And now we get her through Justine too, where her mother hated her. Her mother, through a strange perversity, could not endure her. And they were, when she was 12 years old, she came to live with the Frankensteins. Caroline Frankenstein, Victor and Elizabeth's mother, bring Justine into their family as a servant, but they don't treat her as much like a servant. And especially because we get this passage here about the republican institutions of our country have produced simpler and happier manners than those which prevail in the great monarchies that surround it. Hence, there is less distinction between the several classes of its inhabitants. Justine, thus received in our family, learned the duties of a servant, a condition which in our fortunate country does not include the idea of ignorance and a sacrifice of the dignity of a human being. That whole end of that paragraph was, of course, added by Percy. This is Percy making political comments. Percy's really fighting, government his entire life. And as a polemicist and writing pamphlets and fighting the injustice he sees in the government. And he adds this little bit there. But also Mary, we have a bit from her diary, which she published is later in that she writes in her first trip to Europe in 1814. This is their elopement trip when they first go over to Europe. She writes, "There is more equality of classes here than in England. I'm sorry, and she means Geneva. She means Switzerland. There's more equality of classes here than in England. This occasions a greater freedom and refinement of manners among the lower orders than we meet in our own country. So this is certainly an idea that Mary has recognized, and she has, I'm sure, talked about this, with Percy. And then Percy makes that very specific change to add these kind of, political ramifications to what's going on in this novel that, you can also read this novel and note the politics of democracy versus, the monarchical, and with that class system in England. And that's all part of the endeavor of this novel. Does that stuff hit you? Like when you're reading it, does that stuff hit you as she's hitting politics now?
I mean, it can't fail to. And maybe it's just by virtue of the fact that I know a bit about the period during which it was written, and I know biographically a bit about who these people are because they come from money, Yeah, I mean, of course it does. But that's also years of reading Shakespeare where where you find the political in everything.
Yeah.
So no, definitely. And I love the shoehorning in of this little almost short story about this person. Like these little biographical tidbits that get dropped in over the course of the book are lovely. I won't say diversions because they help flesh out the world, but
yeah.
Ashley
notes that, or asks, why does she say my uncle rather than your father in this? It is interesting, or she could even say my father in a sense, because they've, adopted her, Elizabeth, as the narrator of this letter. I think that she's reminding us, or at least Mary Shelley is reminding us through the character of her relationship in this family, that she is not only that she is still the
like a ward almost.
Yeah. So that she is still a niece, and Victor has already commented that she's a more than sister. So,
and given the sort of romantic entanglement that the book pushes towards for Victor and Elizabeth, it's important to continue establishing that they are not the brother and sister that they have been put into the situation of being.
But she is saying that they're related, so there's there's an emphasis there.
Marrying first cousins is a different thing.
Yeah.
Or it was at the time. I'm not married to a first cousin.
So it was perfectly okay, especially we've already talked about that. It was kind of favored. It was actually a good thing if you married a first cousin. So she's back into talking about Justine. If you were in an ill humor, one glance from Justine could dissipate it. So they all love her. And she also describes her as she looks so frank-hearted and happy, and which I'm sure is an unintentional pun, the frank-hearted there, but I can't help seeing that because we constantly using franken something as a thing. But Justine is frank-hearted. But then when she says, when my dearest aunt died, everyone was too much occupied in their own grief to notice poor Justine, who had attended her during her illness with the most anxious affection. Poor Justine was very ill, but other trials were reserved for her. So we get this, interesting portrait of Justine that, hey, guess what? She also was sick with the scarlet fever earlier, and that that she was ill, and we were all so occupied in our own grief, and first Elizabeth and then her mother getting sick, that we didn't also notice the point that seems to be Elizabeth is making, that she was also very ill from this. So,
and again, overlooking what people actually need.
Yeah. Then she goes on to say she was a Roman Catholic, or at least about her mother, she was a Roman Catholic, and then repented. But she was also Justine's mother, but she was also very vacillating in her repentance. And even when Justine goes back and lives with her mother as her mother's dying, the mother is one day, you know, praising her, and the next day blaming her that all the other siblings have died, and she's left alone with her. That she's pointing out that she's Roman Catholic and goes through this is, we'll see it again, especially next week. Adam had a question right off the bat, but wondering if we were going to discuss Justine's Catholicism now, or wait till next week. And we will wait to next week for that, because she makes an even bigger point next week about the kind of the hypocrisy of organized religion, which you know which goes through this novel, and which is also toned down in a sense, or at least religious belief is toned down in the 1831 edition. That religious belief is a good thing. You know, the talk, the negative conception of that is toned down in the 1831 edition. But in this first edition of the novel, yeah, you know, it's not necessarily, it's not like this, you know, Catholics are awful kind of bias. It's not like against Catholics in particular. It is that they see the, you know, hypocrisy of these people who will preach something and then not behave that way in their life. And they are, you know, and this is very evident later in the next chapter when we get to what happens to Justine. But for right now, we're getting set up for it, and set up for it in a way that points at, you know, this is what people who follow a religion do. This is how they behave. So we get this character, Justine, who seems like just, all right, so you're just serving your family and you're going to tell a little story about her. Big deal. Doesn't really connect to this book. You're just adding another character. Well, Justine is rejected by her mother, by her creator, of course. She's rescued by the Frankenstein family, specifically by Caroline, Victor's mother. We get a little bit of class and politics in the description of her, which, you know, and especially by describing her as she's as the lower orders or servant class have a kind of, you know, what's the exact phrase? They are not ignorant, and they do not sacrifice the dignity of a human being. So they have more dignity than people are used to, you know, seeing servants. That Justine has some kind of humanity that you don't usually see, you know, within the servant classes, or people don't pay attention to, as they kind of ignored her in her illness. And this is something the creature also has to deal with later in the novel. This kind of, you know, the creature doesn't have the humanity that the others have, and so they reject him. So I think there's some strong connections that you can make, thematic connections with Caroline, with Justine and the creature. So that's all going on here. So if you hit the Justine part when you're reading, you were like, yeah, who cares? All right, just get through it. It connects. This is a well-fashioned novel that really wants to connect all the dots between everything in the pages. So I think, so that's why we have that about her. These details serve a larger purpose. Sorry, I'm jumping around in my notes, which I should never do. So criticism of followers of religious institutions, education too, I didn't hit too. The fact that, you know, they talk about how they're not ignorant, and there's an idea that you should educate those not in the privileged classes, is a factor in this book. So we'll hit that later too. And then we get to William. She's going to close her letter talking about the most darling child on the face of the earth.
Oh yeah.
Which he seems. I wish you could see him. He is very tall of his age, with sweet, laughing blue eyes, dark eyelashes, and curling hair. When he smiles, 2 little dimples appear on each cheek, which are rosy with health. I mean, you want to smack this kid. He's so cute. It is cloying in that kind of way that what will really happen later in the century, in the Victorian age, in the description of children. But this is a moment in time where children are really being seen as innocent, perfect creatures who are only happy. And I got news for everybody. That hasn't been the history of humankind, to treat children as these special angelic creatures. This is something that has been, developing for, a little over 100 years now, and really comes to play in the Victorian age, where children are innocent. And in previous generations, previous centuries, children were just little adults that as soon as they can do something, you set them off to do it. So whatever occupation you can. And especially with the Christian worldview that they are living in Europe, children are just as big a sinner as you are, because you're all born with original sin. We're all corrupt, and life is a matter of atoning for the corruption you are born with. But this idea starts to change, and people see children as, no, you're innocent when you begin your life. It's the world that corrupts you.
Well, and that's a great counterpoint to what's going on with the creature.
Yep.
Because I would argue, and I think there's viability to this as I've continued to read. William gets more physical description than almost any character in the book. They talk about his hair, his dimples, his eyes. The only other person who gets that kind of description is the creature. Like, we don't know, we hear how haggard Frankenstein is when they pick him up on the ship, but they never once mention the color of his hair. They don't talk about his eyes. Same with Elizabeth, any of these people. The two people that get physical descriptions are the two youngest people in this world. And they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. One is coddled and the other's thrown to the wilderness.
Yeah, I absolutely see that. So the creature is a child. So
Absolutely.
The creature is a child who no one treats as this innocent, because he doesn't look like it either. I mean, he is completely othered. I mean, he is in appearance and everything. It's no one is going to mistake him for a newborn, even though he is a newborn at first and then
new to the world.
Somebody asked a question about Justine. I jump back to her for a second. In that this description of her, it says, although her disposition was gay and in many respects inconsiderate, yet she paid the greatest attention to every gesture of my aunt. And thought that, you're saying she's inconsiderate? I think it's a usage. I think it's a 19th century usage that it's not. This isn't meant as a negative portrayal of her, that she's being inconsiderate. That she is. At first, I thought it meant that we're not considering that she was, gay or happy, but just not considering the kind of.
She doesn't dwell on the deep stuff.
There you go. So and that's all that it means. It's not Elizabeth insulting her or pointing out a fault in her. It's just a much more neutral way of saying someone's inconsiderate. You're inconsiderate because you're not considering these other factors. You're just being happy. She doesn't mean it negatively at all. So, but William is just perfect. And you see the little Byron hint here?
Oh, yeah.
Because she writes about his two little wives, but Louisa Byron is his favorite. And she spells it Biron, so you don't it's not Byron, but it is Byron. Spelling is still even not conventional, even in 1818. Byron had been known to write his name Biron. So it is not. It's a little shout out to Byron, but it's a shout out in a weird way, because it's a shout out about William having two wives. So it's her hinting at the scandal that has surrounded Byron's life. So because he has left his wife and his wife is had the separation, or I think she gets a divorce. So I think she does, because Byron has had an affair with his half sister, and had a child with his half sister. So Byron has two wives, so there's a little thing in there, and in such a way that I even think that I don't think she's you know, kind of trying to take a jab at Byron even. I think that they all just think that this is humorous. Byron and Percy and Mary and yeah, and I have two wives, you know. So like I think they would all think this is fun and games. So the but William is there and we get a little shout out to Byron. And then this little gossip, which I think is weird. And this is what I'm going to ask you about, because it's about Matt. She goes on for this whole paragraph, because I've already said just a little bit ago that there's attention to detail. So if she's putting something there in some way, consciously or unconsciously, it's connecting in some way to what she's writing about. Whether it works or not is up to us to decide. But I think there must be some kind of connection there. It could just be, I want to lighten this and give a little flavor to things that we would normally talk about. But I'm fascinated that it centers on marriage, and that,
Sure.
you know, it's about Miss Manfield and her approaching marriage with this guy and her ugly sister Manon married to someone else, a rich banker, and your favorite schoolfellow, so who is, I guess, in love with Clerval. And she's on the point of marrying, or somebody's also, Lewis is a schoolfellow, but he's going to marry this, you know, French woman. It all centers on marriage. What do you think?
I think it centers on marriage, which is of course one thing. The thing that I carried away from it, funnily enough, is, you know, his Lewis, who has suffered several misfortunes since the departure of Clerval. And Victor is in Clerval's hands, and we're establishing Clerval as a caretaker. Like when Clerval leaves, Lewis has been suffering misfortunes. It's like wherever this guy goes, he takes care of people. And just that little mention of like how much has befallen the guy since Clerval left tells us what good hands Victor is in when he is tumbled into the hands of his companion. Like that's, I mean, you get the marriage and all, and I think all of that is right on, but that's my favorite little nugget of a detail in there, which is that just in the tiniest letter from somebody who's not even here, we establish that Victor's in good hands.
Yes.
Which is what the rest of the chapter is about.
And Myra writes that she mentioned that isn't this part of the pleasure they get from their writing and social connections? So the idea that these social connections are happening and this is important to people, and should be more important to Victor. And it's not been, that we're highlighting. He should be paying attention to this kind of stuff. He should be involving himself in social interactions. And Jody writes that, wouldn't you see this as Elizabeth's way of saying, I'm waiting to marry you, get home? Yeah, sure. Know, I could easily see that. By the way, let me talk about marriage for a second. And Victor is supposed to be marrying her. So good. So that's Elizabeth's letter. And Victor is, you know, I will write instantly and relieve them from the anxiety they must feel. Yeah, about time, dude. It's been years already. Huh? Yeah. I mean, he says later it's 2 years when he goes home since the creation of the creature. And he's away from home for 6 years altogether by the time he returns. But he's not even returning yet, because first he wants to introduce Clerval to several professors of the university. Victor says, I had conceived a violent antipathy even to the name of natural philosophy. And Henry saw this and had removed all my apparatus from my view. He had also changed my apartment. Now, Victor has this revulsion of science now, which is very interesting because this is the guiding light of his life, or it's the guiding dark of his life, because even he acknowledges before that it's, you know, the workshop of filthy creation, and now it's all darkness, and he's, you know, going among, you know, death and all this on these corpses to learn things. But that Clerval, that Henry has seen and cleaned up this workshop of filthy creation, really begs the question, what the heck does Henry know about what Victor has been doing? Did you get that impression too? Like, Henry must have seen then the laboratory
I mean, he's got to know, well, but then
Parts
again, like maybe parts, it comes back to that same thing of what exactly does the laboratory look like, and Clerval as the ultimate, like, ultimate companion and secret keeper. If he knows something, he doesn't let on. Although, how could anybody suspect what Victor has perpetrated?
Mhm.
You know, um,
I guess that's it too. Well, I guess that's it. It's that sure, he's seen all these body parts and he knows that Victor's been experimenting with this kind of stuff, but he couldn't have made someone come alive. He couldn't have
well, but
made a
also
person.
for a medical student at the time, dissection of a specimen wouldn't have been entirely out of the realm of possibility.
Mhm.
And if, again, I mentioned earlier those, when they talk about Mary Shelley, tying it to the kind of like electrical experiments of the time, like most of it was perpetrated upon frogs, but it was not uncommon for them to discuss like the limb of a man, be it an
Yeah.
arm or a leg. So it's, while it would be, I'm sure, upsetting as it would be for any of us to walk into a room and see like a big old hunk of dead person there,
Yeah.
it's, given what Victor is studying, it's not wholly unusual.
Mhm. And some of them did I mean, if they could get, corpses or body parts, they would certainly, do that, but it was just difficult. Now Aldini did that. Galvani's descended nephew or whatever he was. He got a corpse and he, was attaching electricity to it and
Mhm.
having, doing experiments right with that. Um, so yeah, but Clerval knows that something like awful has happened, and clearly from Victor's, state here. And Victor in the last chapter raved, he said, in his delirium, and Clerval heard things, but, had some idea, but didn't really necessarily think that, didn't necessarily know what Victor had done or would believe that that was possible. So, and maybe the difference too is what we get next coming up in this chapter is that Clerval, Victor says Clerval was no natural philosopher. His imagination was too vivid for the minutiae of science. That's not where that he doesn't understand science. And this is after they go back to his professors and they're praising Victor, and Victor's like, stop talking about me. Because he's mortified by what he's done. But this is odd because you would think it would be the opposite, is that Clerval's imagination would allow him to imagine what Victor has done, not this knowing, like the scientists going in wouldn't necessarily make the connection because they're so focused on the minutiae, like, oh, you can do this with this, part of the body and putting electricity through it and all, but it takes the imagination to see the big jump. So,
Well, and Clerval's focus is languages.
yeah.
You know,
Yes. And Victor's also said this about Elizabeth too, that early on in the novel, the first chapter, I think he said, I delight in investigating the facts relative to the actual world. She busied herself in following the aerial creations of the poets. The world was to me a secret which I desired to discover. To her, it was a vacancy which she sought to people with imaginations of her own. So Elizabeth doesn't see the world the way he does. Henry doesn't see the world that he does as well. So,
well, and Victor sees the world in a very particular way. Even as we get into this next section with his professors, or whoever Waldman and Krempe, even they say he's outstripped us. Damn him! Like he's kind of a prodigy in these
yeah.
regards.
Well, yes, he's 21 years old, or 22 when he creates the creature.
And I love this next section in revisiting. I just simply adore, because if we look at the night of creation as the flashpoint between Victor and the creature, this is where they shoot off in completely opposite directions. Again, the creature's cast to the wilderness.
Yeah.
And Victor encounters people who take the utmost care of him, and even coming down to the professors. So there's that element of education, which of course the creature is going to get with the DeLacy's, but, stolen from them. Whereas these people just kind of like offer it freely towards Victor. And because part of what I'm doing here is the pop culture component, this section of the book, well, I mean, the cherry picking of names for film is fantastic. In the 1931, of course, we know that they swapped the names.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, that
Victor,
comes from the play because they're working
yeah,
from a Peggy Webling play, and she had
yeah.
swapped the names.
So they go from Henry to Victor, which is, or from Victor to Henry, excuse
Yeah.
me. They go from Victor to Henry, but the John Bowles character, the close friend, then becomes Victor, but his last name is in the film Moritz, which is borrowed from Justine. Justine becomes the servant in Curse of Frankenstein in 1957. Valerie Gaunt, the Peter Cushing hunching on in the corner, and ultimately feeds to Christopher Lee. And of course, you've got Professor Baldwin, who is Edward Van Sloan, the professor figure in 1931. And the one that I was startled to re-encounter is the other professor, the opposite, is Krempe, who is the assistant / teacher figure in Curse of Frankenstein in 1957. That first Hammer film, it's Paul Krempe, played by wonderful stage actor Robert Urquhart. So I like, for me, this is, not having read this book since I was a kid, like it's like finding Easter eggs all along the way of like things that people returned to the book after a fashion, but ultimately just like toss things in for anybody who might be paying attention. Of course, as a kid, I wasn't paying attention, and now I see all of it.
I often thought that Peggy Webling had changed the name for Victor to Henry, or swapped the names from the friends there, because Henry sounded more British.
Well, they wanted more accessible perhaps than Victor, I suppose.
Yeah.
I've been looking for that play everywhere. It's hard to find.
I have it. Yeah.
You do? Oh,
yeah.
I would love
to get it. You can find it in a book called Hideous Progenies, which is a collection. I can't remember the author, who had collected all of the stage adaptations. And you might only be able to get it in University Library or like, in a special edition, but I actually have a copy of it. And,
well, there's a Balderston as well.
Yeah.
And he adapted Dracula, or he adapted the Hamilton Dean Dracula into what became the film.
Because he adapted Peggy Webling's play
Yes.
for the script for the 31 Frankenstein, I think, if I'm remembering it correctly.
I think that's true.
All right, let's take a little mid-break here so I can tell you all that we bring Sundays with Frankenstein to you for free, as we did Sundays with Dracula last year. So if you would like to donate to the Rosenbach, you can do so at our website. But why not become a member? If you're not already a member, members of the Rosenbach get free and exclusive access to some of our programs, plus 10% off of any reading courses and 50% off of other Rosenbach programs. And did you know that the basic membership level of the Rosenbach is actually called the Mary Shelley level? So what could be more perfect for you Franken readers to join the Rosenbach at the Mary Shelley level and help us bring the books and manuscripts in our collections to life? So I want to give a quick shout out to some new members this week, people who joined the Rosenbach just over the last week at the Mary Shelley level. And that was Vera from Little Silver, New Jersey, and Robert from Philadelphia, and Cassandra from Philadelphia, all joined at the Mary Shelley level. Thank you. And a couple people actually joined at the Abigail Adams level, and that would be David and Reggie in Delaware, Ohio. Thanks for joining. And Autumn from Bala Kinwood, PA. And Autumn is also part of the Lower Merion Library System. So shout out to libraries there. Thanks for joining, Autumn. If you're watching, you guys, thanks so much. Your support helps me get to make this show for the Rosenbach, and helps the Rosenbach continue to create programs and care for our collections. I'd also like to share with you guys today a little bit of some courses we have coming up with the Rosenbach, because we just posted 2 more courses. And to do that, I will share the screen. So you can go, if you go to the Rosenbach website, if you go here to programs, you can jump down here to virtual courses. You can see all the wonderful courses we have. Some of them that are already running. This Ulysses course starts on Tuesday. There's my Read the Blood of Dracula course, which will start again. Anthony Powell's Dance in the Music of Time with Wesley Stace. There's a Zora Neale Hurston course, an Oscar Wilde course, an Irish women, Writing Irish Women course. And then there's a couple new ones here. Reading Ancient Greek Tragedy with Toby Zinman. Toby Zinman is an Inquirer theater critic, and she's doing a course on ancient Greek tragedy. And then there's a Shakespeare on Film course with Gage Johnston, which I am very excited about, and I'll be in that too. So, but Gage is teaching it. Gage is a documentary filmmaker from Philadelphia, and she's really going to approach Shakespeare film as showing the way people use film techniques to bring the plays alive, and how they do that. So there's also a program coming up that you should all come to, and I know some of you have already registered, and we'll go right here so you can go to our event calendar. And if you look at the February calendar, and then as we go into, we'll just click over to March. At the beginning of March, there's a program that I'm going to do with Dan. And Dan's walked away briefly, but he'll come back, and then we'll talk about this. But we have a program called Franken Films, Mary Shelley's novel at the movies, that Dan and I are going to do together, right, Dan?
Absolutely.
And we'll talk about some of our favorites, why this novel has been so meaningful for so long to create films with, and we'll also get a look at a couple items in your collection. Am I correct there too?
Absolutely, the stuff I've got with me.
Good. we'll figure out what we're going to show.
Well,
but
I've got some nice pieces along. So
good. So it'll be a lot of fun. But we're doing this. This program is free for all Rosenbach members and Delancey Society members. So you have to be a member to register for this. So if you're a member, you can register. I think there's already 24, 25 people registered for it, and I'm sure it'll grow, and we'll have lots of you. So if you want to watch this program, you're going to need to be a member. So join the Rosenbach. And that is it. I wanted to do, before we get back to the novel, let's do a little manuscript. Look at the manuscript, little manuscript share from the book. And let me pull my notes up here. Here we go. And this will take us back to last week too for the chapter. But I love looking at the manuscript that you can find online at the Shelley-Godwin Archive. And I'll share that webpage here. You go to Shelley-Godwin Archive. And when you go in, you can just click right on Frankenstein here, and here's the manuscript. And we are going to look at chapter, I think it's 6. Is that correct? It is chapter, chapter 6, volume 1. And which one is it? I think it's here. Yeah, this is it. This is the page I want to look at today. And when you go to this, I explained this last week, we looked at it too. It's fascinating to look at because you not only have the manuscript page here, which I'll make bigger in a moment, but here's the text of what's on it, and it's everything on the page. And this is clicked on to all here, so you can see everything that's on the page, what's crossed out, what's written over, what's written in the margins. But you can click on Mary Shelley and see just what is in her handwriting that she put on this manuscript page. And you can also click on what Percy added to this. And here's an interesting change that I want to look at today, how he changed some of the language in this manuscript page. So to do so, I am going to click here and just make the manuscript page. And we're right at this part here. And what it says in the published version, which you can kind of make out here through all the crossouts and additions, is it says, well, this comes at the point in the novel, last chapter, where Victor is talking about the summer months past. This is when Henry's taking care of him and he's getting better. And he knows that the silence has disquieted his family. And then he says, I knew well, therefore, what would be my father's feelings, that he has not written home or contacted them. But I could not tear my thoughts from my employment, loathsome in itself, but which had taken an irresistible hold of my imagination. And here's where the change happens. In the published novel, he says, I wished, as it were, to procrastinate all that related to my feelings of affection until the great object, which swallowed up every habit of my nature, should be completed. Now, what she had originally written, what Victor says, but what Mary had originally written was, I wished, as it were, to procrastinate my feelings of affection until the great object of my affection was completed. And that's right here. Yeah, here's the great object of my affection was completed. So she's kind of putting this, my feelings of affection for my family, and also the great object of my affection, which is the creature that he's making. Now, Percy crosses that out. Percy crosses out this object. I think as almost as a writer, like, yeah, you've said affection, you're doubling up here with affection. Let's make, so he crosses that out and he writes, the great object which I had allowed with every habit of my nature. Is that exactly? I think it is.
Which had swallowed.
Yeah, which swallowed up
There you go.
every habit of my nature should be completed. He cleans up the repetition, but I think what happens is that he takes away that, whoa, now we're really, is that he takes away that emphasis that Mary has originally put there, that the affection he feels for his creature is affection, just as he feels affection for his family, that he is kind of torn between an affection for the pursuits and the creature that he is making and the affection he has for his family. And that's kind of taken away, and it's just, he's just the great object of, the pursuit that he is making. And that's an instance where I think that it's great to see the manuscript and her conception of it, and what she's emphasizing there. She's emphasizing that Victor has affection for, if not the creature, for the pursuit, for his science, for his work. And that's what's causing him problems with his family. That's what's causing the problem in his life, that it's tearing him apart. That he has, affection for both things that he wants to do. And that's something you can see. That's why I love this original edition, this original Frankenstein by Charles Robinson, which because you get not only the manuscript, you don't get the 1818 edition, you get actually the manuscript in here, and then in the back of it you get the manuscript without Percy's edition. So you just get her raw first draft. This is what I've written, before I edited it and before Percy edited it at all. So it's interesting to see that too. So that's our little manuscript share for today. How do you I mean, is that, what do you think of that?
What do I think of it? I mean, it's interesting because my primary work these days is as a writer. And so I look at it with both sets of eyes. Like, I absolutely understand Percy coming back through and eliminating the word because we've just read it.
Yeah.
But the stylistic balance of affection versus affection is really fascinating.
Yeah.
And I actually, in hindsight, kind of sorely miss it. Like, what he says is more florid and more quote unquote evocative, but the bare balance of the two I find really fascinating, because we're literally leveling the creature against every other obligation in his life. The addition of the word swallowed is nice because it has swallowed everything up. But yeah, I like, anytime you go back to the author's original intent, you find something useful. Although I am reminded of what you said, where you end up with the notion of an editor was very rare at the time. So all of these great novels we're basically seeing in first draft.
The notion of an editor who would have you rewrite your novel is unusual at this time. This doesn't really happen until late 19th century, really more 20th century. But this is, if not, it's not a co-written novel, but it's certainly collaborative. And it's certainly a good reminder too, that we don't diminish, Mary Shelley as a single author by saying that Percy helped her. what we should be diminishing is this idea that came up afterwards of these kind of romantic artists alone, struck by, inspiration and pursue. That's what Victor does in this book. And that's actually not a good thing to do. And the reality in her life was, as an artist, even as someone who is a writer, and writers are often put alone, but it was a collaborative endeavor for her. She got to talk about what she was writing and share her manuscript draft with Percy, and they would talk about it and change things and do stuff with it. And many of these, artists at the time, these romantic writers were doing this. They did this all summer with Byron talking about what he's writing, and Claire was copying it all out. I'm sure they were all reading it out loud to each other and making comments on it as Byron was piecing together his Prometheus poem and his, especially his Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, the cantos of that. That's the part that Claire was copying out for him into fair copy. So they're working together, and that's a good thing to know on Valentine's Day. Hey, it is Valentine's Day, and Mary and Percy were absolutely, completely in love with each other. So, and working on her fabulous book. So, back to the chapter. Winter and snow arrived. The roads were deemed impassable, and my journey was retarded until the ensuing spring. His journey back home. Nature conspires to delay Victor's trip home. Just a little, we are at the mercy of nature here in this novel, as they didn't realize they were at the mercy of Mount Tambora erupting in that year without a summer. But it's really important in retrospect and coming back to the novel, reading it again, because if not delayed, Victor would have been home before the creature killed William, and perhaps, and through some way, because he's home, it would have been averted. Like, the course of events would have changed had Victor gone home at this point instead of being delayed another year. So, so he stays, and this chapter ends with this Victor with Victor talking about, again, the study and being secluded from his family. Study had before secluded me from intercourse of my fellow creatures, not just his family, but my fellow creatures, and rendered me unsocial. But Clerval called forth the better feelings of my heart. He again taught me to love the aspect of nature and the cheerful faces of children, that he has, and this is the benefits of society, familial bonds, nature, all opposed to the solitary study that he has been going through. I became the same happy creature who a few years ago, loving and beloved by all, had no sorrow or care. I read at the start of the show today. And there's a serene sky, and there's verdant fields, and at the end of the chapter, there's unbridled joy and hilarity. People are dancing. It is, this, again, Victor is back to this point, like he had as a child. Everything is, it's an ideal. Everything is perfect and happy right now. And that's where we end this chapter. So the next chapter is chapter 6. On my return, I found the following letter from my father. And now it's going to get bad again. So just when you think Victor's life's going to be happy, it is not going to be.
Switch. It's beautiful.
So and again, it's the wretchedness in this first paragraph. The father mentions tears and wretchedness will, be his welcome when he comes home, because William is dead. That sweet child whose smiles delighted and warmed my heart, who was so gentle and yet so gay. Victor, he is murdered. So we learned that Victor's child, somebody asked early on, how old was William when he was, Brenda asked, he was 9 years old is William when he is murdered. The Elizabeth, he describes Elizabeth, we'll get a little more in the next chapter, but Elizabeth discovers him blooming and the night before, William was blooming and active in health, and now he's stretched on the grass, livid and motionless. The print of the murderer's finger was on his neck. I like that image because it's kind of floral. It's kind of, it's William as a plant in a sense, right? He's blooming and now he's on the grass like a stalk that has been trampled, dead on the grass. Well, Elizabeth is upset about it, but before we get to that, he's named William. Mary's writing this novel and she decides, oh, and Victor has a little brother and he's named, I know, William. The name of her father, Mary's father, William Godwin, and the dedicatee of the novel is William. It is the name of her half brother. It's the name of the not, I don't think Godwin and Claremont have had a child yet. Mary Jane Claremont have had a child yet, but they will, and he'll be William. No, they have. He already has. So she has a half brother named William too. She has a son named William who was born in January 1816. So she had, and he was the child that was with them in the year without the summer. She brought her baby with her that summer on that trip. That William will die of malaria at only 3 years old in 1819. But he was born, and she had him before she started the novel. She has him all during the novel. His name is William. Like, what is going, like, this is a, psychoanalyst dream, right? You are the first murdered victim of the novel is the name of your father, the dedicatee of the novel, his son, your stepbrother, and your own son. Why on earth would you name him William? So I don't know. Do you like this has to go through your head as an author? William's like you call him William every day. And yet here she's writing about a William that is murdered. What do you think, Dan?
I mean, I think it's a deliberate invocation, both of her father and of her child.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and this is, you talk about how it's a psychoanalyst dream. Like, there is so much by dedicating the novel to her, by naming her child after her father, by naming a character in the novel after her father, brother, child. Like, there's this immense cry for attention, of William the eldest, shall we say. And at least that's what it seems like to me, is everything is pointed towards this, and everything is pointed towards the disaster that can befall a William if familial ties are neglected.
Yeah. And as she's writing it, her father has still not, has he? By this point? Yeah, while she's writing it, her father has not she has not reconciled with her father yet. He is still not speaking with her. So she is the outcast of her father, her revered father, William Godwin.
Like, Mary Shelley as Victor Frankenstein is fascinating in and of itself. Like, as someone who is living in denial of or in exile from their family, and in the midst of creating A, an actual life, B, this thing, which has had a life far beyond any of them, and a life of her own that is unconventional, shall we say. Like, Victor leads an incredibly unconventional life once he leaves, and Mary's doing this. So the notion of this, the fact that William is called William, I think ties into all of it.
Mm-hmm. And right after like he says the murder, then he says, Elizabeth says, "Oh God, I have murdered my darling infant."
Yeah.
This connection in her brain, or in her creative imagination, between murder and infants and children dying, or someone dying, or the parent dying, perhaps because her mother dies as she's born, and in this case, the child is named after her parent who survived. but I also think that it kind of brings it home. Like if you're going to like, if I'm going to create something and I want it to be tragic, perhaps I'm giving you names from my life, because if I see that this name is someone who has been murdered, I feel for it even more as the artist creating this. Murdering her darlings, in a sense, that's a metaphor that's used for taking things out, editing things out of your manuscripts. But in this case, she's murdering her darlings within the manuscript, right? Elizabeth is upset over this, and it's because she thinks she has murdered him, because she says he had a locket with Caroline's picture in it. The picture is gone and was doubtless the temptation which urged the murderer to the deed. So because he doesn't have the locket on, which had a picture of Caroline Frankenstein in it, that must be why the murderer killed William. He saw like he had this thing and he murdered him for whatever the value of the silver or gold locket was. Victor's father said, and this will come into play later. This is a plot point that then we have to come into play later with Justine. But Victor's father says, "You alone can console Elizabeth, my son, to return and be our comforter." Now, for us reading it, we're thinking like, really, Victor as a comforter? Like, how's that going to happen? Because he's a mess. And but his family still has him in this, position that he is, just as the creature later in the novel will come to Victor and say, I want, something from you. You have to give me comfort in some way. His family is asking him for this. This is the, and then what's more important though is he says, "Come, Victor, not brooding thoughts of vengeance against the assassin, but with feelings of peace and gentleness that will heal instead of festering the wounds of our minds." And he reminds his son of the kind of humane ideals by which we're supposed to live. And Victor, Victor himself will have someone else pleading to him for this, but he, this is the point where we've had a tragic death in the novel, and then his mother died, but it's Victor quickly moves on, and they all move on, and this is even worse though. This is because it's a child and he's 9 years old, and we've had the description of how wonderful he was and how everyone loved him.
It's also a murder.
Yeah, and it's a murder.
As opposed to like if he'd gotten sick and died, and the death of the mother is certainly catastrophic, but the fact that the child has been snatched from life is something else again.
Yeah. So Victor and Clerval, Clerval's, he tells him like, you order the horses, you have to go home immediately. And obviously, in spite of what the weather will be, Victor is, automatically just going to go home right now. And he gets in, and as he is, and this is where, and I'm gonna have you read some here in a little bit, but we have he's driving close to the town. Oh, we still have a little bit to get through. "When I drew near my native town, I slackened my progress. I could hardly sustain the multitude of feelings that crowded into my mind." And then he says, "It has been nearly 6 years since he has been home." And I think that's almost, a little shock for the reader. Like, real? Yeah, 6 years he has been away from everyone. That's a while that he has ignored his family for that long. And then he has, "Fear overcame me." Read that from the end to the end of the paragraph.
Where am I looking at? How does the paragraph start?
"My journey was very melancholy."
Yes. "Fear overcame me. I dared not advance, dreading 1,000 nameless evils that made me tremble, although I was unable to define them."
And then read the next.
And is that Lausanne? Just before I dive in? Okay. "I remained 2 days at Lausanne in the painful state of mind. I contemplated the lake. The waters were placid, all around was calm, and the snowy mountains. The palaces of nature were not changed. By degrees, home and heavenly scene restored me, and I continued my journey towards Geneva.
Someone in the Q&A, Christine asked how many of these towns are real places. They're all real places.
Everyone.
Victor is describing the country, around where he is, from Ingolstadt going, and in Geneva specifically here in Switzerland, that Mary and Percy had all been through. They had stayed at, they had been through. These are all real places. And when you go to her journals, her travel journals, you often find this, and I'm going to share a little bit of that in a little bit. But first we get the mention of Mont Blanc, and that's a poem by Percy too. But before there, just so we hear, fear stops him. He's going home, and fear overcame me, and he can't go anywhere. But he looks out on what? The palaces of nature.
Yes.
And the heavenly scene restored me. Again, this idea that nature restores, nature gives life. And it's another moment in the novel too, where Victor is described as coming back to life. I mean, we had that in the very beginning. Like as soon as he's introduced in the novel, he's dead, and then they bring him back to life.
Well, even with Clerval in the preceding chapter, there's the sense of bringing him back to life in terms of society and all those sorts of things.
Over and over again, we get this image of Victor being brought back to life, and it's the metaphor that continues through the novel. And then he mentions Mont Blanc. Go ahead, read that. You do that next paragraph.
That paragraph?
Yeah.
The road ran by the side of the lake, which became narrower as I approached my native town. I discovered more distinctly the black sides of Jura, the bright summit of Mont Blanc. I wept like a child. Dear mountains, my own beautiful lake, how do you welcome wanderer? Your summits are clear, the sky and lake are blue and placid. And this prognosticate peace, is this prognosticate peace, or to mock at my unhappiness?
It sounds like a prayer, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely.
The, dear mountains, my own beautiful lake, how do you welcome your wanderer? And we get that a lot through this, that he is, through this novel, that he's praying to a deity, nature, and it's nature with the capital N.
Yes.
As it often is in this book, nature is the replacement for the Christian God, for organized religion. This is who Victor is praying to. This is who he is, addressing. But it's also it's to the Mont Blanc there, which was also not only a poem by Percy Shelley, but it's a poem that he wrote that summer and then was published the next year in 1817. And it's first published in Mary's first book. She has a book come out. Frankenstein is January 18, January 1st. But a few months before, in October, she had published, her and Percy jointly had published The History of a 6 Weeks Tour through a part of France, Switzerland, Germany, and Holland, which was basically the travel diary and some letters from their elopement trip into England. So they had just published it. And then at the back of that book is Percy's poem Mont Blanc. And it's an important poem in that it's the mountain in the poem is kind of representative of the kind of sublime in nature, and it's inspiring and terrifying, and it also it holds secrets that you can have. It's some of the poem is the wilderness has a mysterious tongue which teaches awful doubt, or faith so mild, so solemn, so serene, that man may be but for such faith with nature reconciled. Thou hast a voice, great mountain, to repeal large codes of fraud and woe, not understood by all, but which the wise and great and good interpret or make felt or deeply feel. So you learn from nature. Nature teaches you what the world is. the couple, and power dwells apart in its tranquility, remote, serene, and inaccessible. And then there's a line towards the end, the secret strength of things which governs thought. And this is the way that the romantics in general see nature as this thing which brings them knowledge, which has secrets to impart to them, but also it's still that idea of especially this vast mountain there, as both inspiring and terrifying at the same time. And that's the sublimity of, nature. That's the sublime feeling that they're constantly trying to tune into with nature. Nature brings on dread. It's that grief and fear that Victor feels, but it also inspires and also can enable him to go on. And is there, I think, does Mont Blanc turn up in this book later? I think she quotes from it later in the book. She actually brings the poem itself in, but this is the setup here that Victor's already, as in the same position as Percy is narrator of the Mont Blanc poem, that Victor is seeing nature in the same way here. But here, but again, as I drew nearer home, grief and fear overcame me. Night also closed around, and when I could hardly see the dark mountains, I felt still more gloomily. I was destined to become the most wretched of human beings. Oh, woe is me, right? Like, and this is a moment in the chat where I feel like, oh, poor Victor. No, not poor Victor. Poor William, okay? Poor your family.
Poor everybody but Victor.
Poor this creature. Yeah, like, and he is absolutely it's all about him. And to have her put this moment in here where he is, declaiming how tragic his existence is, right after he does something that is exactly like what her husband did, connects it with me that this is a criticism of the romantic endeavor, of the romantic artist endeavor, is that as they are focusing on nature and finding meaning from themselves, they're also perpetuating their own wretchedness in their own lives, and as Mary has to deal with in a very real way. It's completely dark though when he arrives at Geneva. The gates of the town were already shut, as they shut down towns in those days. This is security measures. So after dark, you don't get into the town. It's closed up. So you have to wait till the next day. So he takes a walk around, he crosses the lake in a boat. And then he talks about the lightning, because there's a storm, and he saw the lightning playing on the summit of Mont Blanc in the most beautiful figures. And the darkness and storm increased every minute. Read that paragraph there. I'm gonna have you read two paragraphs, but read that paragraph first, because then I want to share something from Mary.
All right, where does that start? I remain motionless.
I quitted my seat.
Great. I quitted my seat and walked on, although the darkness and storm increased every minute. And the thunder burst with a terrific crash over my head. It was echoed from the Saleve and the Juras and the Alps of Savoy. Vivid flashes of lightning dazzled my eyes, illuminating the lake, making it appear like a vast sheet of fire. Then, for an instant, everything seemed of a pitchy darkness until the eye recovered itself from the preceding flash. The storm, as is often the case in Switzerland, appeared at once in various parts of the heavens. The most violent storm hung exactly north of the town, over the part of the lake which lies between the promontory of Bellerive and the village of Coppet. Another storm enlightened Jura with faint flashes, and another darkened and sometimes disclosed the Mole, a peaked mountain to the east of the lake.
The storm is terrific and inspiring and scary. And but the first thing I noticed there is that the lightning illuminates the lake like a vast sheet of fire. Where do we see a lake of fire? In Paradise Lost. So the lake of fire. And this is, you know, this hellish yet inspiring scene here. But Mary, in her journal, actually wrote this, and I think it's, and this is to illustrate that she's taking from her life and her own experiences and putting these natural scenes in the novel, just as Percy does with his poem Mont Blanc. And you can, you know, see that reflected here just from her own journal entries. You will perceive, she writes, you will perceive from my date that we have changed our residence since my last letter. This is actually where she's writing, like just when they've taken the cottage on Geneva before they go and visit Byron. We now inhabit a little cottage on the opposite shore of the lake and have exchanged the view of Mont Blanc and her snowy aiguilles for the dark, frowning Jura, beyond whose range we see every evening see the sun sink and darkness approaches our valley from behind the Alps, which are then tinged by the glowing rose-like hue, which is observed in England to attend on the clouds of an autumnal sky when daylight is almost gone. And then the thunderstorms that visit us are grander and more terrific than I have ever seen before. We watch them as they approach from the opposite side of the lake, observing the lightning play among the clouds in various parts of the heavens and dart in jagged figures from the piney heights of Jura, dark with the shadow of the overhanging clouds, while perhaps the sun is shining cheerily upon us. One night we enjoyed a finer storm than I had ever before beheld. The lake was lit up, the pines on Jura made visible, and all the scene illuminated for an instant, when a pitchy blackness succeeded, and the thunder came in frightful bursts over our heads amid the darkness. So these are scenes that she has experienced herself on this lake that now Victor is also seeing happen here, and that we get this Paradise Lost moment, you know, with the lake of fire is really telling for what happens next. Which you can read this. Yeah.
While I watch the storm.
Yeah.
Great.
Because this is the moment, everybody. At least he's going to see the creature. Here it is.
While I watched the storm, so beautiful yet terrific, I wandered on with hasty step. This noble war in the sky elevated my spirits. I clasped my hand aloud, William, dear angel, this is thy funeral, this thy dirge. And as I said these words, I perceived in the gloom a figure which stole from behind a clump of trees near me. I stood fixed, gazing. It could not be mistaken. A flash of lightning illuminated the object and discovered its shape plainly to me, its gigantic stature and the deformity of its aspect, more hideous than belongs to humanity, instantly informed me that it was the wretch, the filthy demon to whom I had given life. What did he there? Could he be, I shuddered at the conception, the murderer of my brother? No sooner did that idea cross my imagination than I became convinced of its truth. My teeth chattered and I was forced to lean against a tree for support. The figure passed me quickly and I lost it in the gloom. Nothing in shape could have destroyed that fair child. He was the murderer. I could not doubt it. The mere presence of the idea was an irresistible proof of the fact. I thought of pursuing the devil, but it would have been in vain, for another flash discovered him to me hanging among the rocks of the nearly perpendicular ascent of the Mont Saleve, a hill that bounds Plain Palais on the south. He soon reached the summit and disappeared. Oh man!
And when we get the echo of the final novel, Lost in Dark Distance,
beautiful. But the end of this book is.
This happens more than once in the novel, that we get this image of the creature, and then he kind of fades and disappears as if he is a supernatural creature. But here, for the revelation, for to see him enlightening, like, you know, the lightning and the thunder cracks and the light illuminates the scene, and there he is looking at him. And then it goes dark, You know, I love
Clinging
that.
from the rocks. It's perfect.
It's a great revelation again, or the return of the creature in the novel that she sets in this great stage piece, which she has been, you know, leading up to as he's traveling through the country, and what he sees, and looking at the mountains at Mont Blanc, and then seeing this storm. And then of course we get the illusion of the lake of fire, and who does he see? The, you know,
The demon.
the demon, you know, or the demon, Daemon. You know, but the because the creature is at once Adam and also Lucifer from Paradise Lost, and this is where he sees him. The deformity of its aspect, more hideous than belongs to humanity. And this will be a question that we'll really, you know, come to, you know, really talk about a lot, especially when Victor encounters, when they talk later in the novel. The idea that the creature is not quite human. You know, I really enjoyed this introduction in the new Oxford, the 2018 Oxford that Nick Groom edited. And he has an introduction here that talks about an idea more that will come into play later, but it's hinted at here in that, especially as very modern readers, we like to look at this and of course, the creature is a human and should be accorded all the benefits of humankind. And this is his issue. But he is constantly described, not just by Victor, but by the creature himself. And I think the whole project, the whole novel itself, as he's not quite human. And that's his problem. It's not that he is human and nobody would treat him that way. It's that he's almost human, and that leads to all kinds of problems with him. And this is something Nick Groom talks about in his introduction. That's why I brought it up, and I thought it was really interesting. And this is hinted at here, like, as Victor sees him this way, of course. I see in the chat, Lockie mentioned the uncanny valley, that theory that that when something, like when we create, you know, artificial intelligence, and it looks or like a robot, and it looks almost human, but it's not quite, and it creeps us out. How, like, and it's not creepy that looks human. It's creepy that it's almost human. And the creature has something of this going on with him. And this is the, you know, almost more hideous than belongs to humanity. That, like, it's because the way he's created him, he's not quite human. And that's not necessarily saying that you're not human, so you don't deserve what humans get, creature. It is the reality of the way Victor has created him in this, and that he has to overcome, the creature has to overcome, everybody would need to overcome to accept the creature, the fact that he's not quite human.
I might even go a step further, in that the creature, as described it multiple times throughout the book, is borders on superhuman.
Yeah.
Like the fact that he's climbing this nearly vertical rock face at a time where to pursue him would be what's the word I'm looking for? Futile.
Yeah.
You know, that it's the creature perpetrates this act that is so wholly outside of the scope of a normal person. And of course, again, my thing, like, pop culture comes back to it again and again and again. Like in the Universal films, they ultimately came to refer to it as the undying monster.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the Frankenstein monster with the bolts in the neck and the flat head just made it through picture after picture after picture. And you mentioned Canny Valley. I'm tempted to, and so I will take a small sidestep. We're encountering this all the time with the way that computer generated things have infiltrated our consciousness.
Yeah.
And the single greatest Baron Frankenstein on film is Peter Cushing. And of course, he recently stepped into the uncanny valley. I think it's Rogue One. I haven't seen the film, but one of these Star Wars pictures, they've computer generated Peter Cushing into it.
Yeah.
On top of a wonderful actor, Guy Henry, who steps in and does the thing. But to watch it is deeply unsettling, because you're looking at Peter Cushing and yet you're completely not.
But yeah, and it's a question I'll have to ask my kids, because or maybe not even them, but like people coming in generations to come who only see it as Peter Cushing, like, or as the actor who plays Grand Moff Tarkin. Like, they don't like, do you recognize that this is a computer generated person or not?
Well, it's interesting. I was talking to my buddy Matt Pfeiffer, who's a Philadelphia theater director, and he was talking to a fellow named Tom Weaver, who's a lighting designer. And of course, Matt Pfeiffer knows who Peter Cushing is and knows he's been dead since '93, and that the way we see him in Star Wars '77. But knowing that, and was completely unsettled by it. Whereas lighting designer Tom Weaver, evidently, I'm hearing the story third hand, didn't know, had no idea.
Yeah.
He just thought it was some guy in the movie.
Yeah. So it's not uncanny for those who, you know,
who are not in the know.
Yes, who don't know that he is dead, and this
has been since for quite some time.
Yeah. All right. Well, all right. We don't want to go on the Star Wars route here, because that'll be forever. I'll talk about that forever too. So we'll have Sundays with Star Wars soon. I'll do that.
See, I only watch him for Peter Cushing, so that's where we go.
Yeah. I don't, so we'll do. But anyway, the Victor makes the connection right away that you murdered my brother. Like, that he immediately jumps to that, you know, the creature must have murdered my brother. And I mean, he's right. I mean, if you haven't read ahead yet, you're going to find out that he did. And you should think that out anyway. Like, as soon as you hear that his brother's been murdered in the novel, you should think like, oh, you know, this is because it must be the creature. And but that Victor jumps to it is strange. But he also, well, let's see, the way this chapter ends, I think, really plays into that. First, he says, well, the thunder ceased and the rain continued and everything's dark. And then he says it's 2 years since the night on which he first received life. I like he calls him he, that he first received life. Almost calls him a man, right? He almost calls him a human. He first received life. First, there's a shock that, like, oh my God, it's 2 years. Yeah, 2 years. You've been sitting around getting better before you would return home. Now, we know nature stopped him at one point because of the snows and he couldn't travel. You could have gone in the spring, but he doesn't. And so it's been carnage and misery had he not murdered my brother. So really jumping to conclusions here, that the creature was delighting in carnage and misery. But then the last paragraph of this chapter starts, no one can conceive the anguish I suffered. Again, woe is me. Again, it's all about me. This is how I'm going to turn it inside, and it's only about me. And he says, my imagination was busy in scenes of evil and despair. I considered the being whom I had cast among mankind and endowed with the will and power to effect purposes of horror, such as the deed which he had now done, nearly in the light of my own vampire, my own spirit let loose from the grave and forced to destroy all that was dear to me. Now, first I hear like vampire, like, yes, like I love that, metaphor that he's using vampire. But it is first, his response is to lament his own condition, looking inward, not outward. It's all about him, just like the romantic artist. It's all about you. It's not about, anybody else. But the vampire, my own spirit let loose from the grave. What he's saying is the creature is his own spirit let loose. I mean, they're one. They are, they're doppelgangers. The creature is the demonic double. It is the vampiric spirit of nature. And that he would even think of it as a vampire is really what he is. And it is what happens in the very first story in English fiction, The Vampire by John Polidori, which was based upon Byron, which is written because of this summer they all spent together, where Polidori's writing a story and he's saying Byron's a vampire because he preys upon everybody around him and sucks the life out of them. And Victor is also using vampire in the same way, that this creature will destroy those around him, but it's him, it's himself, and he recognizes that it's his own thing. And this is why I said it ties in that, of course, he sees the creature as the murderer, because he's already said that he's already taken responsibility for being the cause of what's going on here, and that he would know that the creature murdered because it's him, in a sense. But that also has really awful, psychological ramifications in Victor's, the way he understands that he has destroyed his family, by abandoning them, just as he has abandoned the creature. So sorry, I had to get all that out in one shot. Dan.
I love it. No, that's it exactly. I mean, the notion of himself feeding upon the people that he loves, destroying the lives of those around him. Like, vampire couldn't be a more apt description. And in that regard, if you really want to chase the metaphor, like, Frankenstein becomes the other great Gothic vampire novel, because you have, he has perpetrated a thing upon I keep coming back to the word perpetrate today. I don't know, but he's put this thing into the world that strips everyone around him of life. And Dracula essentially does the same thing. If you distill both of these books down to their core, what it is, it's, something.
I'm missing you, Dan. There, I think you've frozen. I just saw in the Q&A that I froze for a little bit too there. I think we're hitting some connection problems here right as we're finishing up today. So let us finish this up. Dan, you're totally frozen. I can't, I got nothing here. But that's the end of this, chapter, that Victor's not only returning home, and we'll get to when he comes home. Good, Dan's off, he'll come back, and we'll get to say goodbye. But Victor understands that this creature he has created is a kind of manifestation of himself, that he is, and it's the monstrous manifestation of himself, like a vampire. So we will finish up then right now. Franken readers, hopefully Dan will jump back in while I'm saying goodbye to everyone. But Franken readers, thank you all for tuning in today. We'll post this recording on our website. If, of course, that's how you're watching it right now, thank you for watching. We have a Sundays with Frankenstein Facebook group where we continue the conversation. You can also find these recordings on YouTube, on the Rosenbach's YouTube account. And so look us up online, and I am always available to answer questions via email as well. Next week's co-hosts on the show will be the Ghoul Guides coming back, Dr. Lauren Nixon and Mary Going. I can't wait to have them back on the show. Hey, Dan, you made it back. Good. Yeah. Just saying goodbye to everybody now, because we finished that. I mean, that was the end
that works.
And next week we have the Ghoul Guides on. The first edition of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is just one of the many gems of the Rosenbach's collections. If you're looking for more virtual engagement, head on over to the Rosenbach website. Check out the other virtual offerings we have, including our gallery gateways and exhibitions and other programs. But the Rosenbach is also open. So you can go online and you can set up a time ticket for your visit. Only one party at a time is allowed in, so to keep everyone safe. You can check out our new exhibition on 19th century Japanese sailor Manjiro. Dan, thanks so much for being here today.
And thank you so much. A pleasure, as always.
Good. All righty. And we'll have you back in a couple weeks, actually. So we're not going to stay with this, exact order that we have, but so we'll have you back again soon. I think you're back for the Creature and Victor meeting.
Right? Yeah, I am.
Good. All righty. Everyone join us next week on Sundays with Frankenstein for the rest of chapter 6, because a little bit more in this chapter. as Victor arrives home, and then all of chapter 7. So it's basically next week is all about Justine and what happens with Justine. And that'll take us to the end of volume 1 in the 1818 edition. So once again, we will be played out by Tucker Christine's Pleated Gazelle song, It's Alive. And I'm queuing that up right now to play it. Sorry. And farewell, everyone. Farewell, divine wanderers. And remember, you have hope and the world before you. Bye-bye.
I have some candy for you.